Okay. Hello, everyone. I think you heard me in my role in the previous session as part of the SIACA and the ReadyCap conversation. So I would start with to give a brief overview of, I think, which I have already covered. So it's a centralized mechanism. As you know, that the PACM is basically the centralized UNFCCC baseline and crediting mechanism for public and private sector actors. Many of you are very familiar with the mechanism that was in existence during the Kyoto time. We heard in the previous session under the ReadyCap as well, how Korea in particular was using in the past for its domestic policy measures and its domestic ETS, how the international mechanism has been used. So here, this is akin to that of the past from the Kyoto Protocol, but this has been repurposed to fit the context of the Paris Agreement. As earlier said, like it aims to incentivize and facilitate participation in the mitigation by the public and private entities, promote mitigation in fostering sustainable development, delivering the overall mitigation in global emissions, and contributing to the reduction of emission levels in the host party, which will benefit from the mitigation resulting from reductions that could also be used to fulfill the NDC. So if you look at the value proposition, like I would be looking at three value propositions, one from the architectural perspective, the second proposition is from a country perspective, and the third is from a private sector perspective. What different value proposition is being offered by this mechanism? So the first in terms of the multilateral governance, and I think I've been repeating, and the importance of having a multilateral governance in providing the market with the high quality credits is really an added advantage and a value proposition. So this has been a multilateral oversight by the United Nations and a supervisory body that is being elected by the parties through the formal process of the COP. And they represent 5 UN regional groups and LDCs and SITs to take the aspirations and take the interest of all countries into consideration when the rules are being made. So you have an oversight by this body. It is also like any other baseline and crediting mechanism. You have a third party audited for both validation and verification of outcomes. And also you have a grievance mechanism to address them. Second, most important is that you would be hearing quite a lot of noise in the market of saying that how each standards are Paris aligned. So who other than the one who is being given the guardian role of ensuring that the Paris Agreement as its accountability is fully enshrined other than the UN body. So here, this mechanism establishes its standards and design things from the ground up in terms of supporting NDCs and ensuring robust accounting that are fully aligned to the requirements of the Paris Agreement. Specifically on components related to the NDC integration, corresponding adjustments, and Article 6 database. And the third architectural element is the integrity component, making sure that setting up of a global benchmark of high quality credits and with sustainable development benefits. So it has a multi-layer validation process. So it's been validated by a third-party entity. Then the submission is being reassessed by the UN Secretariat, and the recommendations are independently then being assessed by the supervisory body, which you are seeing in the end, in the left end, in the multilateral governance before this is being approved. Second, because it is being housed within the single house, and it is also there is a mandate for the mechanism registry that produces or creates the digital currency is interconnected with the international system that is supposed to be tracking these ITMOs, which is the international registry. So this mechanism provides you with an absolute foolproof provisions in terms of addressing double counting requirements. It has mandatory safeguards in terms of addressing sustainable development and other priorities, and also having the requirements of equitable sharing of benefits between different stakeholders who are engaging in this mechanism. It is also built as architecturally a future-proof, building the long-term viability for both evolving compliance and voluntary markets. They are compliance ready, it has a global recognition and accessibility, and it also has a scalable infrastructure. As we said, like I briefly touched last time, but this gives you a comparison between the two types of asset categories that would be generated out of this Article 6.4 or the PACM, based on if a country authorizes, it do require corresponding adjustments. And I'm sure that everybody in this room by now, next to your, if you are in carbon markets, I think next to your own currency, I think you would have heard this term corresponding adjustments in carbon market quite a lot. This is not a rocket science. People say it is very complicated, and I'm not seeing who go from here, but I think people say it's complicated, but from a mathematical sense, it's very simple. It's an inverse to your financial transactions. So in a financial transaction, when there is a debt, meaning when you transfer something from your account to another account, your account should reflect as a deficit in your account. Whereas in an emission accounting, the moment you transfer something for somebody else to use, you have to add them back as an emission. So it's basically an inverse to your financial transaction. How to do it, don't worry. There are guidance that is available that you could use. These reductions could be used for the achievements towards the NDCs, or for other markets where, even for voluntary actions where the actors are demanding for compliance grade credits, and also for other international mitigation purposes like that of the CORSIA. The MCUs on the right, these are basically non-authorized unit. So for the PACM mechanism, quality is a mother rock bottom requirement. So independent of the type of the use, whether it's for voluntary or for compliance purposes, the quality is ensured and the quality remains the same independent of its final use. But the advantage for the mitigation contribution units are that the country that is originating these units do not require any adjustment to its national totals, which gives the flexibility for engagement by those countries. It could also be used for results-based climate finance, domestic mitigation pricing schemes, and most primarily that helps countries in contributing to the reduction emission levels in the host party. What does this mean is because the right of the reduction remains within the country in which the action is being undertaken. So you are not basically trading the units outside of the country, and the contributors get basically recognized for the contribution that they have made, either as a financial contribution or for the technology transfer that they have undertaken. What is therein for the corporates? It's basically by purchasing and cancelling MCUs, can make a claim of contributing the technology transfer investment and helping the countries in their pathway towards their NDC achievement by bending their global emission curve. And also the estimated internal carbon prices tangible while delivering the needed climate finance. And this could be used for voluntary purposes. So Article 6.4 is not catering to only the compliance demand. It will also be catering to the voluntary markets and the voluntary demand going forward. In terms of its high integrity built into its design, beyond the architectural element, the independent oversight, the methodological rigor, the safeguards and sustainable development tool, which has robust safeguards aligned with the 17 SDGs via a sustainable development tool, and it has to be monitored and verified on an annual basis. And there's an effective stakeholder consultation process, including that of the appeals and grievance. And also the safeguards that are being mentioned repeated, like primarily to make sure that now it's mandatory to be applied within the PACM context. Here, there is a comparative positioning, by no means to undermine one approach over the other. This provides a bit of a pictorial comparative positioning between the 6.4 centralized mechanism and cooperative approach. And colleagues who have been traveling with us from the past within the journey of this Article 6, either in the negotiating rooms or in the DNA forum yesterday, would very well recognize that Article 6.2 is not a mechanism by itself. It's merely a transparency and accounting framework, nothing more than that. And within the transparency and accounting framework, there has to underpin a standard that needs to be there. And what PACM delivers is what I have said as in terms of the architectural proposition. So in terms of the governance under 6.4, it's a centralized rule oversight with grievance processes. In a 6.2 cooperative approach, when you engage in a cooperation, these rules are defined by either participating parties. But there is a variable level of integrity and impact depending on the standard that underpins within that cooperative approach. The methodologies are highly standardized, and these methodologies are approved with the necessary requirements, not just based on conservative baselines, but also addressing aspects related to addressing uncertainties and also aligned to the various requirements under the Paris. And the methodologies under 6.2 approaches that these are developed and selected by respective parties, and the consistency could vary significantly. In terms of addressing double counting, the complex nature in the 6.2 cooperative approach is that it relies on distinct registries communicating. There are efforts being done by our colleagues outside externally in terms of bringing this together in establishing meta registry, etc. But under the 6.4, it's an integrated system which ensures the tracking in a centralized manner. And as indicated earlier in the previous session, that the mandate is for the direct interconnection between the Article 6.4 registry to that of the international registry that is established to track and record the international transport mitigation outcomes. The reason being that if you are in a country and you are engaging with multiple cooperative arrangements, you should be having sufficient interoperability arrangements to either pull and view those information or to have a transactional basis to bring that. I do not know whether a colleague from Zimbabwe is here. They have a specific design of how to do that from independent standards, bringing that back into the national registry and then reporting. But that complexity is avoided when you engage in 6.4. In terms of economies of scale, like in terms of transaction cost, it's a shared infrastructure by all parties engaging in these activities. And when you have disintegrated activities happening in an atomic manner, the cost of establishing the required MOUs and other building customized system is going to be more expensive. In terms of capacity support in 6.4, you have a full suite of support that both come from the mandates in providing standardized tool trainings, expert networks, etc. When it comes to 6.2 cooperation, they are mostly self-sourced, depends on donor support or partner country resources. Where does it would be best fit for broad market access, high credibility, and sectors needing standardized global methodologies? Where does the strategic government-to-government G2G partnerships, pilot projects, or niche sectors with specific bilateral interest, but it also still need to follow all the review requirements that is needed under Article 6. The PACM is a bridge to Article 6.2. So 6.4 is a subset of 6.2, and there is no competition between what is 6.4 versus 6.2, and 6.4 is a subset of 6.2. The moment 6.4 activities are authorized for compliance purposes, they would be fulfilling the 6.2 reporting requirements. The next one is related to the comparative positioning between the PACM and the different independent mechanisms where you have a program-led standards. So in terms of the authority and the oversight, you have an UN body which is governed by parties. The body prepares an annual report on its implementation, then it seeks feedback and guidance under the COP process where parties provide additional feedback based on the experience of the implementation that has been taken. So there is a continuous loop in terms of authority and oversight where this body is not working in isolation. It works in unison with parties' guidance. In contrast, if you're working with other independent mechanisms and standards, these are governed by individual boards, NGOs, or other private boards. In terms of host party authorization, oftentimes that you will not oftentimes, that in many cases within the voluntary space or independent mechanisms, you as a host party will only be knowing that there is an activity ongoing. Now there are again some changes happening in terms of asking for acknowledgement, etc. But you as a host country will only be knowing when you have been approached by someone asking for authorization for those activities to be used for compliance purposes. Whilst under Article 6.4, it's a mandatory requirement for all project activities before they being registered, it has to get an approval by a host party and the respective DNAs. When it comes to corresponding adjustments, I know that today what happens outside is also with a level of cynicity or cynicism of what happens if the countries that do promise that they do adjustments are not doing an adjustment, right? And there are insurance policies that are built around that, whereas within the centralized mechanism, the system is built in a way that the reconciliation and reporting are managed under one roof within the UNFCCC, whereby you have a full control in terms of what is being flowing. This is the same secretariat which is looking at approving these activities and also undertaking the review of the submitted information in also making sure that the country's included information is reviewed. So this all is been happening, whether there is a need for a reconciliation or reporting, these are all being managed under one roof under the PACM. The reputational risk, you always have a shoulder to lie on to say that any criticism that comes, you can always say that it is a standard or an outcome that is being derived out of an UN approved standard. So you have the UN endorsed quality and high scrutiny of methodologies, reducing greenwashing risks. And they are variable and high in terms of baseline and additionality when it comes to other standards. The NDC alignments, direct support in terms of explicitly designing to help host countries achieve or exceed those NDCs. The by design, the baseline provisions from paragraph 33 to 39 that were adopted in Glasgow is exactly done in a way to address countries to have the crediting level delta to engage in carbon markets that are explicitly aligned to the country's NDC. In contrast, the other side, you would see a parallel path often operates outside of the national accounting and risk of conflicting claims. The integrity, I has already said, it is a multi-layer and it is variable when it comes to the other independent mechanisms. The PACM is not built out of a boardroom. It has its experience of working under the Kyoto, and as I said that now currently the Paris is with the new context, but you could see over this period the centralized mechanism has delivered during the era of more than 7,800 plus projects with 2.4 gigatons of CO2 emission reductions, CO2 equivalent emission reductions achieved, and more than 215 billion US dollar investments mobilized through these activities. And within the PACM, they are Paris aligned to change to that context. By what means? By enhanced baselines, NDC-driven demand, mandatory authorization, and streamlined digital infrastructure. And some of you who were taking part in the Global DNA Forum yesterday, the Secretariat would be providing both the international registry as well as the mechanism registry on live starting from the Q4 this year. The MVPs are already available. And also thanks to countries that who have expressed interest to create accounts and be part of the testing basis. And thank you that I heard from my team back in Bonn that about 12 countries from yesterday in the room has expressed interest to use the 6.4 registry to have engagement with the mechanism registry. So this is the value proposition for countries. And I would say, as I said, initial value proposition was from the architecture. This is what is the value proposition for countries to engage within the Article 6.4. There are financial and economic opportunities in terms of access of carbon finance for international and voluntary compliance, assisting domestic actions without obligations to transfer outcomes, reduced cost and revenue sharing. In terms of governance and oversight, a sovereign authorization, a portfolio management, and everybody has a seat at the table to participate in the global governance of the mechanism through the conference of the parties who are the parties to the Paris Agreement. So that's the value proposition that the countries has. When it comes to institutional and the capacity advantages, the strengthened MRV, adopting PACM standards upgrades the domestic monitoring and reporting capabilities. The expert support on direct access to the Secretariat, regionalized through the RCCs and expert networks for technical assistance, and a ready-made framework, skip years of regulatory development by establishing rules and standards. Oftentimes you will hear from many that 6.4 is complex, but what you should understand is that 6.4 takes the regulatory risk or implementation risk at the regulatory side and making the user to directly take off the shelf and use the various infrastructure, various standards that are developed within the UNFCCC processes. And that's where the institutional and the capacity advantage come for the countries. In terms of strategic and reputational value proposition, it has the global credibility, the NDC alignment, and the risk mitigation to avoid reputational damage associated with some of the units that exist outside. What it aims as PACM is to transform countries from just being a seller of carbon credits into the market to become a strategic climate asset managers in managing the domestic emissions with that of what has to be exported outside. From a value proposition for a private sector, I would categorize them into 4 perspectives in terms of risk mitigation, market accessibility, operational efficiency, and a long-term value. Within the risk mitigation, it has a reduced reputational risk, a predictable framework, and a due process built in within the system. In terms of market accessibility, it has its international recognition. Hopefully, like I think probably our colleagues from AITA will be able to say if they are seeing a trend, but I'm sure that over time there might be a premium pricing for high integrity credits that might be commanding a better price than general credits that you find in the current market. It has a global reach, and I've been repeating many times in a bilateral cooperation, the secondary trading is very limited when the use or the units are being associated only for NDC use, whereas under the PACM mechanism that you would have a global reach from your activity that you have undertaken as a private sector, and if the country provides an authorization to engage, your source of potential buyers doesn't limit to one bilateral country. The global outreach takes you much broader. In terms of operational efficiency, you have the clear rules. The infrastructure are inbuilt and to support you, and there is a streamlined tracking that's available. In terms of longer value, it provides you with a future-proof asset in terms of Paris alignment, ensuring long-term validity as the regulations tighten. The market trends favor high integrity credits, and PACM positions you ahead of the curve. In terms of buyer confidence, with the multilateral endorsement behind PACM, it will be providing an unmatched assurance to the risk-averse buyers. In a market demanding high level of integrity, PACM delivers the necessary best quality assurance, a built-in endorsement of all parties to that of the Paris Agreement. The PACM is open for business. I know that we do have to develop more standards, and this year, the body this year and the next year will be working on developing multiple standards to take off the shelf and use. But it is open for business. We already had our issuance, again, as I indicated earlier, thanks to the Korean investments in certain projects, which has kickstarted the initial issuances. And there are also 1,000 plus new activities coming from more than 100 countries intending interest to participate in PACM. So you have the PACM already open for business. I will not scare you with the number of forms that we have, but just to say that for different types of engagement with the mechanism, there are established forms. And sooner or later that these all will also start to be digitalized, so that if you have, you can use the interface to provide this information so as to reduce the risk of information bias or information gaps. Under the transition, I think one of the topics that has been asked by Nadine to cover is in terms of transition from CDM to PACM in numbers. Among the different projects that were eligible for transition, the activities that have notified intention by end of 2023 were about 1,500, of which we have received about 135 activities that have been approved, like including that of the activities and the POAs, and the numbers will be hitting around 300, 325 before the end of June this year. That's an expectation. We have been in conversation with quite a number of host countries where they are in different stages of providing that approval. About 8 activities are in the processing status of assessment. And these, if they have been approved by the SBM, then they will be added to the extreme right of the PACM registered activities, which have been fully transitioned under the 6.4 mechanism. Why it is quite important at this moment, this is a walkthrough through the transition process, and some of the colleagues in this room have practical experience of going through this. So all the activities in the previous that you have seen, the 1,500 plus, they all have undergone already a global stakeholder consultation process. The next step for countries that have not provided yet the host party approval, the approval must be submitted by the deadline of 30th of June. That's what Nadine was talking about, anything of like the reservation against cancellation category. So if you have, as a country, have not yet decided what to do if the units that are generated from these activities can be authorized, cannot be authorized, whether they should be allowed, etc. But from a regulatory perspective, that once you have missed the 30th of June 2026, unless otherwise the countries decide to change this deadline, the activities under the CDM cease to exist within the multilateral mechanism anymore. In terms of additional documentation, if you are a country like we also have colleagues here from Chile and some other countries have approved for transition with the condition that all transitioning activities from specific sectors would be using new standards under the Article 6.4. They do not have this specific timeline of the 31st December. But if any of the transitioning activities want to use the CDM methodologies until the end of their existing crediting period under the CDM, or until 31st December 2025, which has been passed, the deadline to submit the additional information is by 31st December 2026. This is also quite important to note, because I know that many of the activity participants, I could see quite a lot of private sector in the room. So if you have an activity that you have registered under the CDM on or after 1st January 2013 and which has issued units, they have only time until the end of this year to move to the mechanism registry. If you have not done so, they also cease to exist as per the decisions as so far we have from Belen. And if unless parties decides otherwise, the CDM CERs are basically, I would say, a fossilized unit that remains within the registry with no other action that could be further done by any project participants under the CDM from 31st December 2026 onwards. So I would deeply request, like it's a good mix of private sector being in the room from the region and also quite a number of DNAs in this room from more than 30 countries. So please do remember to inform your activity stakeholders that if they are Glasgow eligible units which could be used for the future NDCs of other countries, they have to act before 31st December to move those credits from the CDM registry to the mechanism registry. Failing to do so, the units will be fossilized and they remain within the CDM registry forever without any action subsequently would be able to undertaken. Once you have received a host party approval, you have to provide the addendum or additional documentation. The Secretariat goes through this process and then there is a review window. That's again, there is another opportunity for host countries. I know that some of the countries are still evaluating in terms of any practical impacts related to the recent changes to the environmental impact that this project might have created. It is also an additional time that if 30th June is clicking, you would be able to allow them to approve for transition. And then if you continue with your domestic process, you also still have an additional 28 days for you as a host party if you want to create a review in case if that doesn't meet your host country requirements. So you would be able to formally request for a review as a host country in addition to the SBM for any other procedural reasons. And the final status is either approved or approved with modifications. Again, if I'm not mistaken, I think the first two activities under the transition were approved without any modification. And then there was a lot of about 8 projects from Bangladesh and some from Myanmar, some from Ghana. They were all approved with modifications. And then in the recent times, again, some of the categories, particularly clean cooking, they all have been approved without any modification, directly approved. And there is a mandatory appeals and grievance period of 28 days, after which the transition is enabled. So this is the full walkthrough of the transition process. And the transition requirements, again, I would not get into the details of specific nature because these are more relevant 2 years ago. But now all what you need to know is that whether you are going to allow them to use an existing CDM methodology or you wanted to use them new methodology. Independent of that, if you are a DNA from a host country, the approval deadline is less than 80 days from today. The transition documentation, what to prepare, the approval request form, which is available in the UNFCCC website. The addendum must be prepared to the document in the following key areas, the environmental, social, and sustainable development benefits. If the activity has any risk of reversals, then you have to specifically address the issue related to permanence, and then the consistency compliance with the existing registered PDD, and if there is a possibility of any post-registration changes. And then the host party specific documentation, including any additional forms or letters or verification mandated by the host party requirements. So yeah, I think it is time essence, and why this is needed, like we do not know yet, and I've been, if the current provisions under the COSIA is applied, and when the PACM becomes eligible, there might be a conversation that happens whether or not the transitioning activities or transitioned activities with the application of new 6.4 standards which will be the case for all activities from 1st January 2026, they may be able to supply to one of the primary demand at this moment, and missing the transition deadline by 30th of June may be a missed opportunity. And that's what I basically wanted to communicate. And I'm sure that colleagues will be asking question, what is the status of PACM with respect to CORSIA? I'm looking at Bjorn. He asked me the question yesterday, so I'm already responding before he asks me once again. So we have provided the information as requested by the ICAO Secretariat. We have provided the information related to the PACM, and the ball is in their court now. And it is decided by the parties to the Chicago Convention that mechanism established under Article 6 are deemed eligible under CORSIA. So we have been just waiting for what they will come back with, any additional information that they need from the SBM side. The SBM has also have requested some additional information from the ICAO side to respond back in terms of addressing issues related to double counting and tracking, etc. With that, which country are you from?
My apologies, Mr. Amumugam. Such a pleasure meeting you. May I introduce myself? I'm the newly appointed DNA, the country representative from Takatuka land.
What is that country, please?
Such an honor. You haven't been. You should really come. Yeah, you know, I have a few questions that I did not want to ask in public. Do you have a few minutes? I know you have to go to the next event, but just very briefly, if I may.
I'm always available.
Oh, thank you so much. You know, I have really. Can we put the next slide? Yeah. You know, I have really so much on my plate, and now with Article 6, I get told all kind of things from all kind of sides, and I just thought I used the occasion to ask your views from the UNFCCC, so to say, from the source. And I was just thinking, everyone talks about the PACM as the cornerstone of high integrity, and I'm really not sure about that because it isn't really ready yet, isn't it? I mean, shouldn't we better wait before we think about it until everything is finalized? What would you say?
I would say that you should engage already. Like it's again a false propaganda as a country for you to think that you have to wait. Like as you said, you have to take the opportunity when it is available, and you have to grow together with when system is evolving. It's learning by doing. As I indicated that other than your country, most countries have designated their national authority at this moment. So I would, I will bet that I will repeat the name of your country name, but so we have more than 120 countries who have established their DNAs. We have standards available already for, I do not know which sector you are looking at. If you are specifically looking at green hydrogen, green ammonia, nitric acid, renewable energy, and solid waste management, the PACM will be having the standard before the end of this year. We don't have a very fancy new state-of-art registry yet, but you will be able to safely take into a destination. We have a vintage car, which is well oiled and machined to issue the units and credits. So already an existing interim registry. Some of the countries that are here have already issued credits in that system. But as I said, we don't have a state-of-art system. But we are also looking at an immediate uptake. We have seen, I'm not sure that if you have any engagement with our colleagues from Germany here, Germany has already announced that for all their public sector travel-related emissions, they will only be offsetting emissions from PACM. It's a very positive trend that came from one of the buyer countries. I'm sure that you might have now been convinced that PACM is not just on papers, but it is actually happening.
Well, if you allow me, Mr. Arumugam, with all my deep respect, but the 6.4 methodologies are yet to be conceptualized.
No, I think the basic foundational provisions related to these methodologies are available. We have more than 49 methodologies that are being currently worked on. So you will have your own process time, and I'm sure that you are looking for some new investments to happen. What I wanted to give you as a certainty are two things. One, what you do as an investment shouldn't become irrelevant after a future point in time. So if you are having an activity in your country and that do not have a standard, as and when this standard becomes available, if your activity comes forward to the system within 1 year from the adoption of that standard, it will be able to claim all retroactive credits for the period that it can claim. So it always never loses an opportunity to get credits from these activities. And secondly, that these units will have an immediate demand to be used by then. Before the end of this year, I'm hopeful that one of the major demand sectors like the Corsia will be providing the positive signal to PACM. So methodologies is one of the elements that one should be looking at. And I know that currently people are looking for standards, and that's where we from the Secretariat, along with our supervisory body, is focusing this year and the next year to have as many standards as possible. Earlier I said that we are currently looking at adopting at least the 8 different standards that I have mentioned, like the green hydrogen, green ammonia, the renewable energy methodology, solid waste management, N2O methodology, and the clean cooking. They together constitute more than 80% of the market share that exists today or in the last 1 decade, except in the removal side. And for sure that if you are looking for removal types of activities, and I have to be honest, that it will take some time. But if you are looking at mitigation activities that are primarily focused on reductions, and these are activities that have low risk of reversals, like meaning that after the crediting period under the mechanism exhausts, if you have to ensure the permanence of those credits for a longer period of time, the supervisory body is still working, so I don't want to give any false promises. So if it is from a removal side sector, it takes a bit of time, and I don't see something that we will be having a standard. Of course, we have a bottom of submission on savanna burning, but we will not be expecting to have a new standard under the PACM. If you are having an activity on removals, apologies, you have to wait for 1 more year. But whether the 1 year be worth, I see yes, because I'm the salesperson of PACM, so I need to be justifying that the quality that I have, and I see that the lost opportunity, probably the price compensation, will compensate to the time that you might have lost. But if you are looking at any reduction activities that have less risk of reversals, 80% of the market share, standards that are relevant for 80% of the market share will be available.
Oh, Mr. Arumugam, thank you so much for taking so much time. I know that you have to run, but if you allow me, there's one thing I'm not really convinced about. I mean, super important for us at Takachukaland to meet our NDC. And doesn't authorizing ASICs for ERs and applying the corresponding adjustments weaken my ability to meet my NDC?
Absolutely not, because under Article 6.4, by design, we have the provisions which basically take into account of equitable sharing of mitigation benefits, both from the design by which the standards are established. It gives a certain level of cushion to the countries to meet their NDC targets by offering them, if you look at the emissions, you will be reporting back as a country in your inventories as national totals of what has been your current level of emissions in the country and what you have traded outside of your country based on the delta. The design of the mechanism will already make sure that you have sufficient benefits ingrained within that activity. What you actually authorize and sell outside is not pinching your own wallet. That's the design that exists. In addition to that, we also are currently working in helping countries in identifying sectors and types of activities where they don't um, run towards a race to the bottom, but they race to the top, and also expose high-cost mitigation measures for international cooperation while keep the low-hanging fruits and low-cost mitigation measures to themselves. And we have a fantastic capacity building team, along with the regional experts, are also trying to deploy. Before the end of this year, we will be having a modeling tool that will help countries in identifying what type of activities and sectors that one could expose based on the country's long-term implementation plan until the mid-century.
Yeah, you really speak from my heart. There are a lot of strategic decisions to take, and as I told you, like I have so much on my plate, and as you know, Takatuka-land is rather a small country, so I hear from everyone who talks to us that A64 is definitely more complicated than A62, and beyond, the PACM is even a lot more expensive than the other mechanisms.
This is always a myth. Oftentimes people say 6.2 is way too easy to engage, and I bet you, I can give my contacts, and please do contact me. I'm still finding difficult to pronounce your country. I'm sure that you might be an LDC country, right? Because if you're an LDC country, I have zero cost solution for you. Right? If you're an LDC country, you don't pay any transaction cost, so you don't pay any upfront cost to the Secretariat, either in terms of administrative share of proceeds, which is 15 US dollar cents per credits that is being issued. And also you don't pay any the 5% of adaptation contribution. It's an opt-in, like if you want to contribute to the adaptation fund, you can do. But if you're an LDC SIDS country, the transaction cost within the interaction with the UNFCCC is zero. Of course, it has a third-party development cost, but from an engagement with, I do not know if you have any independent standards that came to your country telling that they will give you a free of cost registration issuance for your country for credits. Yes. Some independent standards say? Yes. Ah, very good. Yeah. Tell them I want to meet them. And also, like, we don't have any indirect cost because you know that within the infrastructure, like you might have heard, something called as registry. That's where the digital currencies are issued. So we charge 15 cents. And I know that some programs charge 10, 12. But you can move the unit within the registry as many times. But I know that there is a particular independent standard which charges you for every account hold, like as an account holder, that moving between every account, they charge you an indirect cost. We don't charge them. I won't say which standard it is, but there is a standard that exists which is currently charging you for moving the units within the system. So in a total overall cost, I would say 6.4 would be cheaper in an overall comparison. And if you're an LDC SID, it's absolutely cheaper than any other country. And if you are in a non-LDC SIDs, in a cost per ton of CO2 reduction basis and engagement in carbon market, I would still say it will be cheaper because many of your, like as I told you, that PACM will give you an automized AEF template for the country. So you should take the overall cost, not just the direct cost that you pay for issuing the credits, but the indirect cost that the country has to go through. And as I told you, that the initial report will be available, the standardized template will be available, so countries will be able to use. Every year we will give you the AEF to the country to submit. If you are engaging in PACM, it is directly connected to the international registry. The consistency checks are going to be much more straightforward. If you are using any independent standard and if you are engaging in cooperation with one country, for each country's cooperation you have to submit a separate report. Whereas if you engage in Article 6.4, all what you have to do is only once to submit one report for cooperation with that, and then you can engage with any country that you wanted to engage in bilateral cooperation. I would also say your country, when there is a bilateral cooperating partner coming in and asking you to establish their own standards, etc. You can also ask them why can't they use PACM as their underpinning standard. You can have a bilateral cooperation with another partner, but use PACM as your standard to underpin and credit the unit. And you can engage in terms of the quantity, in the price, what type of activity is purely your sovereign choice. But you don't need to have a steering committee to approve a standard. You don't need to look at looking for endorsing some independent standards by your buyer country, where that is again limited if it has been authorized for NDC purposes. If you're still not convinced that PACM is more cheaper than anything else, I'm sorry for that.
Well, I mean, it's really a relief for me that PACM will be less work for us, less work and also less money, because time and financial resources are unfortunately quite scarce in my country. But I mean, I'm sorry to take so much of your precious time, but I just heard somebody talking about the CDM transition, and I think I heard that the deadline for transitioning CDM projects into the PACM is June 30 this year. But yeah, we are not so worried because I think there will be extensions and exceptions, isn't it?
I don't have the silver bullet of if parties do anything in Antalya to change, because this has already been changed once. A presidency from Brazil, like when they negotiated, when they were the presidency countries, did indicate that there are practical problems for them to provide the approval within the deadline of 31st December 2025. The deadlines were extended by additional 6 months. Following this process for the last 10 years, I doubt that there will be a political appetite to increase this deadline again for another 6 months. So I think it's an absolute deadline. And the difference that you also have to consider is that when we went to Belém in 2025, the COP happened in November and the deadline was until 31st December. So they were able to take a decision before the deadline has ended. Whereas when we now go to Antalya, to Ugur's place, the deadline would have been already in past. By 30th of June. So you asking to reopen and concluded negotiated date. People who follow this process know how hard it is to crack. Probably you can cut a diamond. But in the process, getting that deadline, I don't see that there is any possibility of extending. But again, as I said, there is always something can happen. But I can be sure that 100% sure that it's not going to happen this time. This is the last deadline in my view.
Well, that's good to know that this will really be a hard deadline, and as you said, probably such a negotiated item will not be opened. Would be like opening a Pandora box. But is that something that I, as a DNA, have to bother with? Because my impression is that this whole transition business can be handled by the private developers. You know, I already have so much on my plate, so I don't really think that is something that I should put myself into as a DNA.
No, as a DNA, it is your primary responsibility to provide an approval before the deadline, because as a private sector, once the approval has been given by the host party or the host DNA, I still have 6 months more time to submit the additional documentation. So the first step is the approval by the host party. And again, in some countries, the private sectors are pushing the DNAs, and some countries we heard that the private sectors are not that very keen. And here it is not, the UNFCCC's role is not to come and sell for countries to say that, okay, you have to do a transition, right? So the issue that we are trying to say is that you have a future possibility of these units being used in the future and getting recognized from these activities, and it will be a missed opportunity. And it's your sovereign choice and what you want to approve and what you don't want to. But the deadlines are deadlines. And as a host country, you providing an approval, like one of the things that I also heard, like where people normally get confused as a host country, is that mere giving an approval is already writing away their assets for being sold outside, which is not the case. So it's a two different process. There's one process as approval and one process as authorization. And what has been requested by the countries in the internationally negotiated outcome is for the approval, not for the authorization. So the activities have to be approved before the deadline, but the authorization, the countries can take its own time. I know a country from Latin America, which is one of the examples where they have clearly provided an expectation management with the stakeholders, indicating that we have to meet the international deadline, adopted deadline by international standards. But this is by no means that we are guaranteeing you that all units that will be generated will be authorized for the future for use in compliance purpose. So there is a flexibility that lies within the country on what to do after it has provided an approval. But you have to make that expectation management clear to your private sector, not to go with a false expectation that the moment you get an approval, you will be automatically authorized to be sold to another country under 6.2 cooperative approaches, or through the 6.2 cooperative approaches using 6.4 as a standard. So they have to be mindful that all what they are doing is meeting the international deadline for meeting the 30th of June deadline. So that's all what they are doing. And I would say it is more like a no cost. Of course, there is a cost to complete the transition, which is like a $10,000 fee to complete the transition process. And I, as a private sector, that if I $10,000, and even if I say that it's a $30,000, if the current market price is $20, I'm talking roughly about 500 credits. So I think it's not a big cost for me. If I'm hedging my risk for a future possibility, I think I will be engaging in the transition. But it's again, each country, like I think, have its own choice, and it's a pure sovereign decision. If the country has an absolute decision that it doesn't want to transfer any projects from the past to the future opportunity, it's a legitimate decision by that country.
I mean, that's really an enlightenment and also a relief, because I wasn't aware of all that I have on my plate about that difference between approval and authorization. It's really good to know. If you just allow me a very last super quick one, won't we lose the value of our existing CDM activities if we transition?
Absolutely not. It is in the contrary.
That was indeed very brief answer. I'm a bit surprised, Mr. Arumugam. I thought it was just the two of us, and now I see so many of my colleagues. I mean, not that I caught Mr. Arumugam. Maybe, colleagues, you want to use the chance, if you also have burning questions. So-young, would you like to share two from the Mentimeter? Maybe we start with the two top priorities with the most likes.
Yeah, thank you, Nadine and Peruma. Feel like a rock star. Yeah, we got quite a huge number of questions through the Mentimeter. The top rank questions is that it was mentioned there are 49 methodologies in development with the standards for green hydrogen, ammonia, and renewables by year end. What is the prioritization framework? And the second question is that which host countries are presently aimed at the forefront of CDM transition? Over to you, Peruma.
Thanks, Young. On the first one, we basically have a framework which feeds in 4 inputs, and thanks for that question in clarifying, right? So we have one, which is a political mandate, which says that you have seen from my earlier slides that more than 150 plus approvals have been received from certain host countries. And these activities, for example, I do not know, my friend from Chile is here. So in Chile, what they have done is that they have approved activities, but they said they have to use new standards. So there was one input source in terms of prioritization within the methodological prioritization framework, is that there is a direct CMA mandate to prioritize the SBM's delivery of standards catering to transition projects that have been given approval by countries, because they are the ones who are interested to immediately act once there is a new methodology available in the sector. The second, the Secretariat has done an analysis based on the 1,100 plus prior notification that have been submitted by project participants who are interested to take part in Article 6.4, and that's the second entry point, that we looked at all the 1,100 plus activities, categorized them into sectors where there is a demand coming and where does the prior notification has been submitted. The third input source that we have used is in the last decade, where does the carbon market's interest is, and as I told you that other than the removals, we have from the reduction side, because removals, as I said, still we have to work on where there is an interest. The rules has to be completed, so we don't want it to engage in something that it will take time, right? So the third input of prioritization is based on where does the carbon market engagement and interest is there in the last 6 years to 10 years. The fourth framework within which that the methodology prioritization is also for us, how important it is top-down that comes from the CMA, from the parties to say that to focus on certain standards. The same comes from bottom-up, right? So we had from one country, Nadine, who was playing as a role play, asking that when there is no methodology, why should I be engaging? And why should I also be deserting if there are 30 people who have had trust in this mechanism and have submitted new standards to be developed? So that's our fourth. So always our prioritization is top-down, that comes from the political process, bottom-up that comes from any stakeholder who has trusted in the mechanism and submitted. So there are 30 bottom-up standards coming from various activities. So they will be given equal prioritization, 19 from the top down. And that's where I said as 30 plus 19, 49 at this moment. And this number will change. And within this 30, what you are seeing now is 7 in the slides, because the remaining bottom-up 23 are under the initial completeness assessment stage. And if I have to be brutally honest, within those 23, there are 3 standards which has just cut, copy, pasted an existing independent standard from outside. And they said they are Paris aligned and you do an assessment. And unfortunately, they haven't qualified even the initial completeness check by the Secretary to take it to the MET panel or MET expert group to further process. By no means that other standards in the independent standards are inferior. I'm saying that that's an experience that people said that if you want to use, we also have a mandate to look at on a complementary basis what exists in the external market to also to be inspired to be developed under the UNFCCC. So when UNFCCC developed any standards, we also look into what is currently existing externally. And just by not using verbatim, using from an external standard doesn't mean that we are not looking what's happening in the external standard. So these are basically 4 input to the prioritization of the MET. So it's the top-down mandate by the parties to prioritize standards that are needed for transition approved activities. Bottom up, all the people who have trusted in the mechanism and submitted the methodology take an effort, the 30. The methodology development and interest in the last 10 years, and the prior notification that we have received. And then in terms of the most active host party, I don't have on the top of my head, but I think like, Hugo, can I put you on spot? I do not know. If, for example, if in the future, if Brazil submits its approval, probably they will be the largest one. They would have 89 or 95 activities from Brazil if they come forward. Currently, we have, I think, there are transition approvals from Uganda, quite a lot, including afforestation and reforestation activities. I think something from Niger, 4 activities, particularly from an ANR from Uganda. I think I remember we have seen, I think the front runners were Myanmar projects, starting from the beginning in terms of providing approval, in terms of transition approvals, transition submission, and also the issuance. It's all the Korean Myanmar project was the first. And then the second lot was Bangladesh. They had about 9 projects. And then we have also received transition approvals from Bhutan, Nepal. Do we have anything from Sri Lanka? I don't think so. Sri Lanka. But in terms of front runners, by numbers, I do not know between the number and volume. And we know that, is there anyone from Vietnam here? I also know that there is a big chunk coming from Vietnam. I do not know the volume. 24 plus, if I'm not mistaken, from 29. So 29 from Vietnam, 95 from Brazil, 9 from Colombia, 29 from Chile, Uganda, I do not know the number. So we will be, that's why I said, like, if you take away India and China out of this picture, with the remaining 510, we would have received at least 350 to 370 before the end of June, based on what we have been. So the 2 bigger countries that are, we do not know the status yet, is India and China.
Oh, Mr. Arumugam, that was so interesting. Such a privilege that you took so much time. I'm sure now you're running late. I also saw that I'm running late because I have registered for a very exciting panel. Hopefully you can see it. Yeah. And I really can't be late there because this is moderated by Mr. Uma Krishnan. He's the carbon pricing and Article 6 expert from the RCC. And I think you should come too, Mr. Arumugam, because the practitioners there engaged in the Article 6 implementation and CDM transition will surely have very exciting and diverse insights. So I see that they are starting already, so let's take a seat.
Thank you. Thank you, Nadine. Yeah. So I would now request my fellow panelists, Hugo, Wesley, Sangsung, and beyond. I'll sit here. Thank you, colleagues. After the wonderful role play by Nadine and Perumal, so now it's a very perfect segue towards the panel. So the topic of the panel is that it's a dialogue. We would like to hear from the practitioners. So we have Mr. Hugo from Government of Brazil, so who is responsible for leading the CDM transition. And we have Wesley, who is from the And we have Wesley. He is from the Green Growth Institute, handling on the carbon transaction facility. And we have Mr. Sansung Ha from the EcoEye, the first AERs which got issued from the Article 6.4 PACM project, which is a CDM transition project. And we have Beyond, who is from the market side. So without much of further ado, I would now request my first panelist, Mr. Hugo, specific to the government perspective, from the, how was your approach in terms of transiting the CDM projects to Article 6.4, and what are the institutional arrangements which have been the critical in the process? Over to you, Mr. Hugo.
Hello. Okay. Thank you, Uma, for the invitation, and good morning, good evening, everyone. So, first of all, let me tell you that we in Brazil developed this new structure. We appointed our DNA recently, and it lies inside the Ministry of the Environment and Climate Change, and it acts in coordination with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So we established our DNA, and right now we are preparing and developing models that will guide the decision-making process to establish our internal governance structure for 6.2 and 6.4. That being said, specifically to the 6.4 Brazil sees these instruments as an opportunity to attract investment, right? To expand the number of activities and projects that at the end of the day will support the implementation of our NDC. And as Perumal just presented, there are many aspects of the PACM that complies with the implementation of NDCs, and some of them that I would like to emphasize here are the overall mitigation in global emissions. Additionality is also very, very important for us, and I will address this later, because this will ensure and bring us good quality projects. And by good quality projects, we foresee 3 dimensions that are inside of this. So it's environmental integrity, and social and work regulations. In Brazil, we have very strict laws on environmental, social, and work. So this is something that should guide the projects that we have being developed inside the country. One other aspect that is important, it's more important for the 6.2, but also should guide the 6.4, is the alignment with our national climate plan. So we have our NDC, and we established a very strong governance structure inside the country, in which last month, this structure, which was our Federal Committee for Climate Change, approved our national mitigation policy and the adaptation policy. Inside of each one of those 2, we have sectorial plans. And the sectorial plans for mitigation example, I think we have like 7 sectorial mitigation plans. And for each one of those plans, they already have mapped all the technological in other possible pathways to promote the NDC implementation. And as I said, this is more important for 6.2, but we use that also for 6.4 to guide the kind of investments that we want to attract to the country. As Perumal said, we have 96 projects that asked for the transitioning, and we established a domestic procedure to assess those projects. It is divided in 3 phases. The first one being an open consultation process in which we presented for public general the 96 projects. We also made available a form in which people could address comments in favor or against the project, saying that some of them saying, oh, I think that this project has some issues related with negative social impacts on this, and this. And then we kept, I think this for like 2 months open. We received some questions, some comments on each one of those projects. And this helped us to better assess and better understand each one of those projects. Where should we should be looking at when assessing the transitioning. And then we move to a second phase, which is the one that we are right now, in which we are actually assessing individually the projects and also making some final consultations for the project developer and other public institutions benefiting from systems that they have with information that would support the decision-taking that is under development. After that being finalized, we move into the third phase, in which we again made public through the website of the Ministry of the Environment the list of projects that we approved. This will open a 10-day period for people to present their views, if they are against or in favor, or have anything else to comment about the project. We will do this final assessment and then promote provide this list of projects that are approved to the Secretariat. So this is the domestic process that we are developing, and we absolutely expect to have that presented to the UNFCCC over the next, during the month of May.
Thank you, Hugo. So it was very interesting point specific to the NDC sectoral plan and having institutional well-defined rules and regulations with that as a perfect point for Wesley. So my question is, like, from the GGJ experience work supporting host countries on Article 6 readiness, working with the various governments, what is your learnings of how the countries are looking into the CDM transition and PACM engagement? And what are the key conditions when they are looking into those kind of activities?
Thank you, Uma, and good afternoon, everyone. I know we're already in the afternoon. I'll try to be brief. Thanks again to the Republic of Korea for organizing the event and to the UNFCCC for inviting GEGI. As some of you may know, GEGI has a carbon transaction facility, and under that facility, we have a readiness program where we support countries on Article 6 and Article 6 governance and strategies in particular. So I come to this event today with some of the learning that we've had working with many countries across multiple regions, and I will try to share those. I think they actually align quite a bit with what was mentioned already by the government of Brazil. The main point that I have to share today, and I think that also aligns with the presentations from Perumal earlier, is that CDM transition is not just a procedural step. It's a strategic decision for countries, and this is how it's being approached at country level. And many countries are realizing the exceptional value proposition of PACM, realizing that there is Article 6.2 that is already developing, realizing that all of this costs a lot in terms of administration and efforts, and that they need to decide where to actually put their efforts. And CDM transition also has these efforts, and being strategic about it is knowing exactly what this will deliver for the country. So that strategic aspect is being seen across countries in different ways. Different countries approach the CDM transition in different ways. I won't mention countries, mostly because some of you are in the room, so I will try to be more general. I think some of the pros of CDM transition are quite obvious. You can preserve activities, you avoid needless restart costs, there is continuity, you get into the market, you develop as the market is developing as well, as Perumal said earlier. On the more cautious side, we've seen countries, especially with large CDM transition pipelines, wondering how this aligns with their national development priorities and their national climate priorities. How this aligns with their carbon pricing instruments at the national level, and looking at whether the projects that they had under the CDM are maybe more on low-hanging fruits and that they would try to attract different types of activities and credits. And in that case, there are more strategic considerations that are at stake. One key learning, and this was repeated multiple times, is that approval of transition doesn't mean authorization. And I think this is a point that really needs to be emphasized multiple times, because we have felt that this has stopped countries from engaging in the CDM transition earlier on. And there are definitely questions in terms of alignment with national priorities and use of the CDM transition, but because that authorization can come later, approval could also come earlier. And in terms of support that GGI sees as most helpful in trying to support practical decision-making related to the CDM transition, we feel that, as was mentioned by Brazil, looking at engagement across Article 6 as a whole and developing clear strategies when it comes to authorization and the types of mitigation activities that would be supported is probably the best way to go. So this is what we have tried to do, and this was often what was requested by the countries themselves, supporting Article 6 strategies that consider prioritization of the CDM pipeline and the transition, and potentially, as was mentioned earlier, good management of expectations with project developers that might want to equate approval and authorization in countries. We also have provided support that was more practical at times, such as supporting submissions to the UNFCCC, supporting those communications, and maybe more procedural as well, training the administrative staff and building the capacity, as well as working on standard operating procedures on how the CDM transition would work all the time as part of a broader effort to try to standardize procedures on Article 6 in general. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Wesley. So it's like very interesting, like you mentioned about the private sector project developers, how they are looking into this. So now the next speaker is obviously Mr. Sahun Shah. So one of the first Article 6.4 approved AERs which has been issued. From your perspective, what are the key operational challenges which you have envisaged in terms of the transition, and then towards getting those credits issued? Over to you, Mr. Ha.
Thank you, Ma. But actually, our Myanmar project is the first CDM transition project, but our 6.4 ER will be issued soon. The other Korean project is issued the AER. So first of all, I would like to briefly explain about the background of Korean companies' investment in overseas CDM project. Originally, Korean government had planned to allow international credit after 2021 in order to use this credit for the NDC under Paris Agreement. But Korean government announced it will use the international credit for 2030 NDC at the time of 2016. So Korean government decided to allow Korean ETS compliance entity can use the international credit from 2018, which was phase 2 of Korean ETS. That vision made Korean entities engaged in the CDM even in 2018 when the CDM will end within 2 years. If there was a 6.4 mechanism, definitely Korean government only allowed the 6.4 mechanism. But at the time, there was no 6.4. But there was some discussions, positive discussion about the CDM transition. So actually, Korean ETS compliance entity and Korean developers' investment in the CDM since 2018 was early action based on the CDM transition. So that's the reason why more than 50% of current finally PACM registered project 21. Among 21, I think more than 12 projects involved in Korean entity. So based on this situation, I would like to share some challenges about the transitioning of this CDM project to 6.4 mechanism. The first difficulties in practice is financial difficulties. We all mentioned about the additionality is one of the key criteria for the integrity, high integrity. So additionality means additional project, and high integrity project means needs sustainable and cash flow from the carbon sales revenue. But when CDM stopped and the PACM delayed so far, so no credit revenue since 2021 vintage of the credit. All credit is freezed. So we had to move some of our CDM portfolio to voluntary standard to continue the project. But some of the project, for example, the Bangladesh or Myanmar, we decided to continue the project by our own money. So, for example, the Bangladesh project, we set up, we supported a local NGO, and they hired more than 500 employees to take care about the whole country, the stove. We have invested more than $50 million to install more than 5 million stove there since 2018. And there are more than 5,000 entrepreneurs who produce the local stove. If we stop the investment, then whole ecosystem is collapsed. So we had no option to continue the investment without any carbon revenue. So we are very struggling now. So even and when we decided the investment in Bangladesh in 2018, even we received the confirmation letter from the Bangladesh DNA. They promised that they will make a transition swiftly when the 6.4 transition rule is available. So actually, Bangladeshi government quickly approved the transition, but they are hesitating and then they are considering the authorization. So that makes another further delay. So when UN and host country and the country like Korea accepting the international credit to use this credit for the NDC, as the same as considering the high integrity and additionality, the timely implementation is very important to support the project developer, continue the project and scale up the investment. That's the major challenge. And the other difficulties for the monitoring and the verification and issuance, the major challenge is time mismatch. Because for example, household devices, we need to do every 2-year monitoring survey. But for example, 2021 monitoring, it was several years ago. And house device lifetime is 3 years or 5 years. Now is 2026. And verification is only possible after full complete of the transition. Then maybe this end of this year or next year, the verifier needed to do the site visiting or online visiting. But how they can verify the data, which was collected from several years ago? And that is very difficult for the project developer. And then the other thing is the PACM interim registry. According to my understanding, we needed to open the account before we issue the 6.4 ER. But in order to open the account under PACM, the host country or the other participating party like Korea needed to submit initial report and needed to submit engagement form. Then they can authorize a private company as a activity participant. Then we can open the account. This kind of process also make another delay. And Korean government does not allow this authorized emission reduction credit directly for Korean ETS. They will review this credit again. It takes around 6 months, even simplified approach. So this kind of overlapping and complicated process is very difficult for project developer to continue this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hab. So now very interesting to be on. So you heard from the government, you heard from the development partners, you heard from the private sector. On the market perspective, how do you see all these challenges kind of getting into this? So what would be your perspective in terms of when you interact with your IETA members who are developing projects or who are selling the credits? What's the view from the market side?
Thank you very much, Uma. A pleasure to be here. Kamsahamnida to our Korean hosts. So for those of you who are not aware, IETA, we are the International Emissions Trading Association, set up in 1999, and we represent over 300 companies globally, developing projects, developing standards, methodologies, exchanges, and also the buy side of carbon markets globally. And we have actively participated in the Article 6 negotiations, primarily through the business and industry NGO group, BINGO. And we are also very active in domestic compliance markets in Korea, in Japan, in China, in the EU, as well as the development of voluntary carbon markets around the world. So I think we have seen now that we are undergone basically 3 stages of carbon markets globally since we were set up in 1999. Of course, the first one was the rise and fall of the CDM. The second one, to some extent, has been the rise of the voluntary carbon market and independent crediting programs such as Vera and Gold Standard and corporate demand towards net zero targets. And we are now in the transition to the third phase, which is really Article 6 of the Paris Agreement and the establishment of PACM as well as 6.2. Now, we're already 10 years into the adoption of the Paris Agreement and the fundamental principles of Article 6. And of course, the first part of the action, as most of you will be aware, has taken place under Article 6.2, using the infrastructure or the methodologies that was developed in the voluntary carbon market by independent crediting programs, such as what Singapore is doing, using Vera, using Gold Standard, but also other countries that are developing bilateral cooperative approaches, such as Sweden or Switzerland, that is now driving the sovereign demand for ITMOs to be used against their nationally determined contributions. But as highlighted briefly by Perumal previously also, even more importantly in this time period when we look at the demand side is actually CORSIA and the international scheme for offsetting of international aviation, which in the first phase that ends this year and the retirement deadline is early 2028, we will need around 150 million tons of authorized ITMOs. And by the end of the second phase in 2035, we may need more than 1 billion tons of ITMOs authorized by host countries. But currently, we don't see enough supply coming out of developing country parties, mainly due to challenges around domestic regulation and Article 6 authorization frameworks. So this is really also to parties and DNAs here in the room, a request and consider this opportunity, which is time-bound, and there is a growing demand for these types of credits, but there is certain eligibility criteria that is set by ICAO and the technical advisory body. We have heard that 6.4 PACM may become eligible, but as of yet, we don't have the final certainty. But we do have a number of other standards and methodologies that we know for certain are eligible at this point in time. So if you have questions, very happy to discuss. The second part that we are discussing mainly in this session is, of course, the demand for Article 6.4 ERs and PACM credits, which I would say Nadine had a very good demonstration here, asking some of the basic questions. Of course, it is still more immature than 6.2, and both in terms of methodologies and the registry and the infrastructure that is still being developed. So based on that, the demand is relatively uncertain. Apart from a few early movers, such as South Korea, which will allow AERs for the Korean ETS and towards the NDC achievement, and some early indications that the EU may consider using 6.4 PACM credits towards their 2040 target, but that is more than 10 years from now. The private sector is mostly, I would say, in a wait-and-see mode, because there is a question around the stringency of the methodologies and the demand signal that will come. So we all know that PACM and the supervisory body has developed a large set of new standards and tools. Most notably, there is a requirement for a downward adjustment of baselines to support the Paris alignment. There is also the mandatory share of proceeds, both 2% for the overall mitigation in global emissions and 5% to the adaptation fund, which means that, that despite what you think, in some instances, there will be a higher cost for developing this project, or you will have at least a smaller amount of issuances from the same project type as compared to in independent crediting programs. an example that was developed by the Project Developer Forum at the end of last year is that a cook stove project using old legacy CDM methodologies would now receive approximately 80% less credits for the same project type under PACM with new FNRB values, downward adjustments of baselines, and share of proceeds. Of course, that means if you're a project developer, you need 5 times higher price for the credit, which is completely fine if that's what the market can provide. But currently, there is a question of who is willing to pay this price for the credit. And ultimately, this will require stronger governance, regulation, and linkage to domestic compliance markets, where this price can really be set by governments and be driven by regulated demand and not just voluntary corporate net zero targets, which we have seen in the last few years have been very fickle in terms of the demand. But ultimately, we believe that competition is good for both efficiency and innovation. As Perulma highlighted, especially in the removal space, we have seen in the last few years several new standards, such as Puro, Rainbow, or Isometric, that has developed methodologies for biochar, for enhanced rock weathering, for geological carbon storage, etc., that currently does not exist in the UN system. So by complementing and working together, we believe that the market can improve and develop, and that's the trajectory that we are on. So happy to work with all of you on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Bjorn, for bringing the overall perspective from the market. I know that we are 15 minutes, 12 minutes beyond the schedule. Maybe since the topic is very interesting and I see there is a pin drop silence in the room after listening to the role play and then listening to the colleague from the government, private sector, market, and the fund. Maybe we have like 2-3 questions to the panelists, and then we can conclude for the lunch, because I think there is no other meeting happening in this room. Maybe 10 more minutes, we can try to go for it. So any questions to the panelist colleagues? Okay, maybe I'll just try to break the ice. So again, to my wonderful colleague from Brazil. So we heard like a lot of challenges from the private sector in terms of X, Y, Z is not there, which is not good. So from the Brazilian perspective, in terms of when you interact with your project developers, what are the challenges they feel like as a private sector in terms of getting the transition approvals, and what would be your guidance to them in terms of providing approval to these projects? Over to you, Hugo.
Thank you. I'll try to address that very objectively. So, well, first of all, when we had the CDM running in Brazil, it was under the governance of the Ministry of Science and Technology. And throughout this process, it's now under the operationalization of the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change. This might seem to be very small difference from someone from outside the government, but from from the government perspective, this is a huge difference, because we don't have the same easy way to change teams, etc. So it's a putting this in a new body structure. You have to create capacity. You have to create a team to do that, and it's not that easy inside the government. Even for a government big as Brazil, it's a huge challenge. And you can add one level of difficulty if you consider that the unity that is working on this transition was created a few months ago. So it's very difficult, it's very challenging. We don't have enough people to process this. So this is the first thing that I want to acknowledge. And remembering that we are on a time-sensitive moment. We have until June 30 to present this to the Secretariat. The second aspect, the way I mentioned before, is that we want to be sure that the projects that we are transitioning, they comply with environmental laws, social and work laws. So for that, we, as I said, reach units from federal level that had data sets on federal, on environmental regulation, for example. And even though they have that information, if a company is not in compliance with environmental legislation, they do not have any kind of connections between an eventual problem that one company might have under the law with the project developed. So what we are learning right now is how important it is to have solid data set systems structured that will register this information and make it possible to be consulted throughout the years. We didn't have that set out. So this is one thing that it's a challenge that presented to us right now, and we want to have a better system to make it possible to have that information ready when necessary. And on the strategy, again, there is an alignment with national priorities, as I said, through our climate plan. And this connects directly with the Brazilian ETS that was approved last year. And we have until the end of this year to regulate the entire ETS system. And the connection lies on the methodologies. Our national law established that the committee that implements the Brazilian ETS will have to approve domestically each of the methodologies that will be able to be used. And this will be, we'll have to consider also the methodologies that the PACM puts in place, so we can consider that for new projects.
Thank you, Hugo. I see there is one question from India.
Thank you. I have very specific question. So for India, we have a lot of CDM credits. So when we were discussing with our project developers, they want us to transition entire credit. So, and going by the ITMO route. But if you see, those credits are mostly in the renewable energy, where our market is already mature, and clean cooking projects, where the marginal abatement cost is not very high. So we were internally discussing it, and we would want to transition the project where the marginal abatement cost is very high if we have to go by the ITMO route. But since it is very difficult to convince the stakeholders, so my question is whether initially we can go for a MCU route. Again, we have to convince our stakeholder or the project developer that there would be a demand for MCU in future. And later on, if they can qualify for the PACM related environmental integrity standard, maybe the ITMO route can be followed. So anyone can answer that question. So thank you.
Thank you for the question. Yeah, we're actually, this is an aspect that is under assessment. It is one of the things that we need to count when to better understand what would be the outcome of the whole package of credits under transitioning. So, in just to add to that, I think that our the package that is the 96 projects that are transitioning in Brazil, around 70 to 75% they lies on the renewable energy sector. So this is also something that is happening in Brazil.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. So, as Aita, we also do quite some work in India and with a lot of our members and developers in India. So, when it comes to this question, I think for every country, of course, there's a different context, and you have to consider what makes sense in terms of your NDC and your LT LEDs. But in the specific context of India, I believe for your 2030 NDC, you're more or less already on track to meet the targets, which means in theory, you will have significant room to authorize credits for international mitigation purposes, whether it's for bilateral partners or for CORSIA. So if I were you, I would consider, again, looking at the list of eligible methodologies for CORSIA purposes, because that is a big opportunity for you to export authorized credits. And secondly, consider what bilateral partners may be looking for in terms of procuring credits. Now, what you will find is that a lot of the old or legacy CDM projects would not qualify under any of those buyer demands, which means that you can approve the transition, but in the end, there will be no buyers. So basically, most of the private sector will still be disappointed, and it's basically just a cost and a process for government and private sector. I know Perumal may have some personal views on this too.
No. It's not a personal view. Like I think it's more to say, like I think from the beginning, that's what I'm saying in terms of sovereign choice, right? Like I'm not India like has its own sovereign choice of what it needs to approve and what it do not want to approve. As I said, some countries has made it very clear, right? Like so, it is managing the risks. There's one equation that always been grappling with, which I think is like Indian Airlines, for example. I think Beyond was talking about the demand under CORSIA until 2026 with 100 plus million, and then going up to 1 gigaton for the compliance period from 27 to 35. I'm someone who was in the room who negotiated very heavily on the EUC criteria under ICAO. And also part of when the assembly resolution was done, from 2030 onwards, the way that you calculate the obligation for countries to meet the CORSIA demand changes. You use the formula of global growth, aviation growth until 2030, and thereafter in the equation, because the differentiation that is embedded within the UNFCCC negotiations on climate change was addressed through ICAO resolution based to look at until 2030 to see the global average, and then to look at country-specific growth embedded within the equation in terms of the along with the global growth. So countries like India, mostly Asia-Pacific countries, like if you take the overall demand under CORSIA, the 39% of the global demand under the CORSIA is going to come from the Asia-Pacific region. And then you have the European European aviation industry will contribute about 32 to 33%, and then the Middle East around 11 to 13%, and then you have the North America of 17 to 19%. So this is the spread. Now my question is that the annual average aviation growth internationally, both domestic passenger transport and cargo transport in Asia Pacific on a yearly basis is growing at 8.7% to 9.3%. Right? So when India thinks about its NDC, like we've been hearing, like not only just India, like all the countries which has a massive growth of aviation sector in Asia Pacific region, are you looking at also the additional demand that your aviation sector is looking at? And I'm sure that every country is looking at it. And the way that I am thinking, or that's why I said, like, if I'm a project developer in India, when I'm coming for you to approval, you have to make that expectation management very clear. That's what I was been telling. And I think Hugo also mentioned, and also like I think Wesley was saying that the difference between approval and authorization, right? Like, so if I'm a private, if you really ask me, I have 100 projects in India which I have developed as a consultant, right, in the past. I'm not going to come for any transition for any projects because I'm no longer involved with them. I sold all my projects to other bigger players. The issue that I'm thinking, and I've been telling to many countries that has an aviation growth, like with Thai Airways, with Indian Airlines, Air China. So if your aviation sector is looking at credits at the same time in 2030 or 31, I am damn sure like I would be putting my tooth and nail as UNFCCC to negotiate, because we are an observer state, but we will be negotiating as well within the ICAO process, right? So my sense is that for Indian Airlines or aviation sector in your country, there can be a situation that may happen that these transition activities, if they are going to be allowed, if they are allowed to use new standards, if CORSIA makes a decision, as I said, the vintage and the time frame is their decision. It is not UNFCCC. ICAO may or may not, which I do not have a clarity or a silver bullet solution. But if I'm in a country that I have my aviation sector growing, the legacy projects that Bjorn is telling, there might be a situation that within the portfolio of aviation sectors, if these credits become eligible, because from 2025 onwards, they all have to use new standards, independent of when the activity has started, right? The volume might be low compared to another independent standard. I'm sure that you will find hundreds of articles criticizing each other, like backbiting, this standard is better than the other, this standard gives you this. And we are going to be in a situation, like I'm not contradicting to what Bjorn is saying, but then it is always why the UNFCCC mechanism or standards is looked at, is that will be used as a reference for comparison. Whether you like it or not, you can like, dislike, but it is going to happen. That's what the market drives. So my sense is that if the new standards are allowed, you may be able to make a choice in 2027 or 28 if ICAO gives a clarity that if the CDM projects from the past, why independent projects that have registered after 2016 will be able to deliver credits after 2021, and they are eligible to be used under CORSIA under certain vintage. Why not? And CDM activity that has been registered from 2016, they can make a decision on vintage and time frame. That's what I'm saying. What if that they make a decision in the future that CDM transition activities applying new standards under the PACM may be eligible to supply to CORSIA? I don't have a response, but that's a possibility. And what all you lose as a country is that you have to tell your project developers that my approval doesn't gives you a guarantee for authorization. All I'm giving is that I'm giving you an approval if you wish to, and all what you pay is the $10,000 for transition. That's a risk that you are taking. But in the future, if there is a demand, there may be a possibility that, like I think we heard like from our colleague from Indonesia earlier, there was a clear expectation that that's what she said, that the Indonesian Airlines is looking to only procure units from activities that were developed within Indonesia. Maybe Indian Airlines may in future say that these are legacy projects. We are in a situation we do not know what happens in the geopolitical situation in 29 and 30. And they may say that in my portfolio, I would like to use a certain proportion from legacy and certain from new activities. And you are losing that opportunity if you don't approve them by 30th of June. This is all I'm saying, that it's purely your choice and it's a speculation, and the market is all about speculation. And will there be a demand? Will there be a possibility to hedge the risk? Will there be a possibility that your aviation sector, I do not think that any aviation company, I know that AITA is also working on sustainable aviation fuels. What we negotiated is that by 2035, CORSIA was supposed to die, and thereafter that everything will be managed by sustainable aviation fuel. I doubt, based on the current uptake on SAF, and with the current fuel prices, maybe, but with a SAF, I don't think that it is going to hit more than 9%. You need to have up to 35 to 40%. I know that India has a target of producing 500 million cubic meter of SAF every year. That is Hardeep Singh Puri's goal. But I don't think that we will be reaching that goal. So still CORSIA exists. Offsets might remain. They have to be a renegotiation, needs to be started sometime in the ICAO process to extend the CORSIA beyond 2035. So maybe that's a choice that your aviation industry could think by saying that Air India, by saying that, okay, I don't want to buy from a unit outside which is costing them $29 or $35, but they might possibly want to buy. Since they are legacy projects, they have economic benefits. Since they are allowed, maybe they may be able to procure at a lower price than what exists outside in the market. But this is purely a market speculation. And if I'm a market player, I would do that as hedging my risk, because I do not yet know that Corsia told me that all legacy CDM projects, independent of when they have registered, what methodology they use, they are not to be allowed under Corsia. They have not made a decision. And I have the same parties to the Chicago Convention are also the same parties to the Paris Agreement. And I'm sure that the message will go from UNFCCC to the members sitting in the ICAO Council, telling them, what are you doing? Right? So that's where I'm saying that it is all, there is a possibility and there is a speculation. So then it is your sovereign choice. Like you say, it's absolutely local. I'm not denying that renewable energy in India is currently has the least cost in terms of mitigation measure. But this is something that you can hedge the risk, but you have to make the expectations, like manage the expectation of a private stakeholder very clear. And that's what I think Wesley said before. And also that Hugo was telling in terms of managing that expectation.
Thank you, Perumal. I think now we have almost come to the end of the panel. I would really request a warm round of applause to all the panel members. Thanks for taking time and joining us. And now I'll give it to our moderator, Nadine. Over to you, Nadine.
Thank you so much, Uma, and if you could please put the next slide. Yeah, thank you so much, distinguished panelists, for an indeed excellent and inspiring insight into your multidimensional views. We are promised on the very last meters, the very last minutes of this event. This is also called the Article 6 diet. While others eat lunch, we give you food for thought. But we decided jointly to accept running over time because we feel in the room your strong interest in taking informed strategic decisions and in leveraging what Article 6 has to offer. So thank you for staying back. Now you've heard about the why, the how, and the diverse perspectives. But importantly, you are not alone on this journey. Therefore, it is my pleasure to very briefly hand over to Julie Amoroso-Gabin, who is the lead of the RCC Asia and the Pacific, to talk quickly about the RCC Support Office. Please, Julie.
Thanks very much, Nadine. It's actually very hard to be in between lunch, so I know that everyone needs to go. But I just wanted to emphasize that earlier you were also here, and I mentioned that we have 6 collaboration centers across the globe. So for those of you that are not from Asia Pacific or MENA and South Asia, you do have respective RCCs as well in your respective region. So we have one based in Panama, covers Latin America, and then we have one in Grenada, who covers the Caribbean, and another 2 in Africa, one based in Lome covering West and Central Africa, and another one based in Kampala, who covers then East and South Africa. So each of the RCCs have respective Article 6 experts, and they are the ones who Perumal had mentioned earlier, who is our dedicated expert to work with the countries on the different journey of operationalizing Article 6 in your respective country. The modalities of support varies in terms of one could be capacity building support through regional training workshops. And this is what we do, I think, for the past 2-3 years now. We are doing rounds of regional workshops to better equip the countries on how they would be able to operationalize Article 6 in their countries. We also do respective clinics with the countries. So this is a very one-to-one approach with the countries in terms of trying to unpack the different elements of Article 6 components, and this is done together with the country. So what we do is we curate specific questions together with the country, and we organize a clinic, bringing in the different experts coming from Bonn or from the other RCCs to be able to respond to the very specific questions from the countries. What I'm saying is that it's a very targeted approach, and depending on the context and circumstances of the country, that's how we deliver this different support. And maybe very lastly, again, the support comes in different forms. One is capacity building. Another one is knowledge product development as well. And this is being done together with the experts in Bonn, and at the same time also, if there is a need, then we partner with the different support agencies in the region as well. I think I will pause it there. For those of you who are interested, we can share, of course, the links to our website where you would find the different products and the different materials. And yeah, feel free to approach me if you're still here. Thank you. Over to you, Nadine.
Thank you so much, Julie, and I can highly recommend the bilateral deep dive and hands-on clinics that are very targeted and tailored. I have recently been part of one with my team that was organized by Julie. So, recommendation to use what Julie just mentioned. I want to briefly complement by giving you an overview of the support offers, products, tools provided by the Secretariat. So please check out our website. You can just Google A6CB, Article 6 capacity building. We have a whole range of products. These are only the ones on CDM transition. So we have a lot other ones. We have, for example, the A6 Academy. There we have, as part of the A6 Academy, a currently ongoing course, jointly certified by us and the University of Oxford, where we have about 1,200 participants, mid and senior level, from 121 countries. We also have different modules, micro-learnings, for those who have little time, overviews, stakeholder voices, reports, and we also have all the resources and presentations from all the Article 6 related events, both at the global and the regional level. Now, as I said, this is only a selection of our products and tools, only the ones relevant to the CDM transition or explicitly focused on CDM transition. The first one is a video recording series covering all elements of the transition process from A to Z, demystifying the processes and the steps. Then the second is from our explainer series. This is a hands-on step-by-step manual on filling out the host party participation requirements form. And then we have a user-friendly online course on successfully navigating the decisions and processes along the CDM transition. And fourth, we have a eFAQ document on all questions we have received through regional clinics that we did as a follow-up on the CDM transition video recording series. And to this eFAQ, we will also add the questions that you have shared in the Mentimeter today, which we could not answer verbally. We will get them answered from our different substantive colleagues and Perumal and put them up. So can we have the next slide? Now, I beg you a favor to please take 1 or 2 minutes to fill out the evaluation survey, because it's really on my heart that the Article 6 CB work that we do is tailored to your interests. So we really want to do only products and tools and events that you find actually useful. So I would just pause a very quick moment to let you fill that in. And then I would ask Perumal to send us out with the one last synergizing slide. But let's first, if you could go back, take a short moment. If people have filled it out, maybe you can just raise your hand, because then we will continue with Perumal.
think while they are taking the feedback session, I thought I will once again present transition. So that Wesley has said that under his CTF that he's going to procure all transition projects, and Bjorn has said that there's a and Bjorn said that there is a huge demand for transition projects. And our best friend from ECOI saying that all projects that Korea engages all will be eligible under the Korean ETS. And Brazil said that they are giving projects for 95 projects for approval. I think that we are in a good place now. Jokes apart, but I think thank you so much. And I think like all I wanted to communicate is that, as I said, that it's absolutely a pleasure always I come in, and I do not know when is the Asia Pacific Climate Summit that normally AITA does, and hopefully, I think that's in July, right? In July, so it will be after this deadline. So we also thought this is the last opportunity for us to communicate, because it's a pure sovereign choice. As I said, that our interest is not to have all projects getting approved for transition. We wanted to be providing with the necessary information, and US countries take the informed decision. And if you're a private sector, what is the level of risk that you wanted to take and hedge and push your countries if you really are looking for transition? I know that there are communities that look for new investments. There are communities which look for benefiting from the previous investment. So this is all your choice in terms of what you want to engage. And Secretariat's role is to provide with the information necessary that could aid you in making your decision making. Nothing beyond that. And you always will have different views. And in the end, like, we are all friends. So that since all the four have said that everything is going good, just for fun. And I would say that, like, this is one slide. I will not go through any of this thing. I think I have covered. This is a simplified process diagram as a takeaway. And please do, we would also have a DNA forum and one more event in the implementation forum on Friday related to carbon markets. So thank you very much. And you have just 70 days. If you wanted to move with transition approval, and by end of this year, or maybe like in July, Bjorn will change his mind through some survey that he undertakes with the buyer community, saying that we are all looking forward to PACM. I'm hoping to hear that from Bjorn in July. Thank you so much. And Nadine, can I close it formally, the session? Thank you so much for all of your patient listening and staying and giving away your time of your lunch to be with us. So thank you so much. See you around. Wish you best luck.